Most men find out their marriage is falling apart through a text message or a credit card statement. I found out because a heating technician went into my basement and sent me a message asking who was locked inside a room I didn't know existed. My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 53 years old. I own a 3-bedroom house in Raleigh, North Carolina. A house I've lived in for 16 years. A house I thought I knew every square inch of. I coach youth lacrosse on Sunday mornings, and until 18 days ago, I was the kind of man who genuinely believed his biggest problem was whether the gutters needed cleaning before October. I want to tell you about my wife. Her name is Diane Ellison. Married 17 years. Together for 21. She likes cedar candles. Mystery novels which, as I now reflect on it, should have been a signal visible from space, and she takes her tea with honey and a thin slice of lemon. Every morning. Same ritual. I knew that woman. I knew her the way you know a house you've lived in long enough to walk it in the dark. Or I thought I did. This all started on a Wednesday in March, which is already a month that has no business being trusted. Diane was in Nashville visiting her old friend from graduate school, Paulette. She'd been gone 4 days. I was doing what men do when left alone, cereal at 9 p.m. College basketball on 2 different screens, wearing the same flannel for 3 days without apology. I was content. I was at peace. Then the boiler started making a sound, not the usual sounds. Not the routine mechanical exhale of a heating system doing its job in a cold house. This was different. A low, grinding rhythm. Something metallic and unhappy. Like something inside was chewing on something it shouldn't. I pulled up a local HVAC company on my phone, and within the hour, a technician named Barry Holt from Holt Comfort Solutions was standing in my front doorway with a tool bag and a firm handshake. Good guy. Barry. Graying beard. Work boots with paint on them that wasn't from any job he'd been on recently. Give me 25 minutes, he said, heading toward the basement stairs. I gave him 25 minutes. Made myself a sandwich. Watched the second half of a game I didn't care about. Living. Then my phone buzzed. Barry. Texting me from my own basement. Mr. Ellison, there's a locked door behind your utility shelving unit. Looks like it's been here a while. Is someone in there with you? I actually laughed. Typed back Barry. I don't have a door back there. You sure you're in the right house? 3 dots. Then, sir. I'm certain. 4 heavy padlocks on the outside. And I can hear someone breathing on the other side. I stopped laughing. 4 padlocks on the outside. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I didn't fully process it right away. Locks on the outside of a door are not a security measure for keeping people out. They are a measure for keeping something in. That is not a lock. That is a cell. I was down those basement stairs in 11 seconds. Barry was standing beside our old wooden utility shelving. The large unit Diane had insisted on keeping even after I'd suggested donating it 4 separate times. And it had been moved slightly away from the wall. Behind it a door I had never once seen in 16 years of living in that house. 16 years. It was a hollow core interior door. Painted the same beige as the basement wall. If the shelving sat flush against it, which it always had, you would never know it was there. The 4 padlocks were industrial grade, each mounted to its own bracket. And from behind the door, quiet but unmistakable, the slow, rhythmic cadence of someone breathing. Call 911. I told Barry. Already on with them. He said. 4 officers arrived in under 10 minutes. I stood in my own basement while they worked the locks, feeling like a man watching his house burn from a room he'd been locked inside. I kept texting Diane, something's happened. Call me. No response. She was probably at dinner with Paulette. I told myself that. I needed to tell myself something while the officers cut through the padlocks with bolt cutters and the door swung open. The room was empty. Not just unoccupied. Scrubbed, clean concrete floor. A single bare bulb overhead. Unlit. A compact Bluetooth speaker propped in the far corner. Still warm. And on the floor beside it, a cracked screen burner phone resting on a folded moving blanket. The breathing had been a recording. Looping. Triggered remotely. Officer Dominguez. Young. Calm. Methodical. Lifted the burner phone with gloved hands. This device was activated within the last 90 minutes. She said, "Someone turned it on after Barry came downstairs." I understood what that meant even before she finished the sentence. Someone had known Barry was in my basement. Someone had waited until he was close to that shelving unit, then triggered a recording specifically designed to make a heating technician send his client an alarming text, specifically designed to make that client call the police, specifically designed to put law enforcement inside a secret room in my house. This was not a prank. This was a script, and someone had been rehearsing it for a long time. I found out how long 48 hours later, when a detective named Linda Okafor was sitting across from me at my own kitchen table with a notepad and a very particular kind of stillness, asking whether I had any connection to a self-storage facility on Garfield Industrial Drive. I did not, except that according to the records, I did. 3 visits over 14 months. Paid in cash. A rental agreement signed in my name. And when they opened Unit 38B, they found a women's winter coat, 2 prepaid debit cards linked to an account registered under my name, and a photograph, a woman I had never seen before. Early 40s, auburn hair, standing somewhere outdoors and smiling at the camera with the particular ease of someone who had no idea what her image would one day be used for. "Mr. Ellison," Detective Okafor said, watching my face the way a scientist watches a chemical reaction. "This woman was reported missing 13 days ago. Her name is Sandra Reese. Do you know her?" "No," I said. "I have never seen that woman in my life." And that was true. Completely. Absolutely true. But here is the thing I didn't tell Detective Okafor that night. Because I needed to be alone to process what it meant. When she left, I went upstairs. Not to call a lawyer. Not to call my brother. I went to our bedroom. To the small bookshelf beside Diane's side of the bed. The one she keeps close. The books she returns to. I pulled them out one by one, and there she was, Sandra Reese, printed on a square of photo paper, tucked behind the back cover of Diane's battered copy of The Secret History, which she had read so many times. The spine was held together with a rubber band. Smiling. Safe. Tucked inside my wife's most read book, like a bookmark. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 17 years, and held a photograph of a missing woman my wife had hidden in plain sight. And I started counting backward. Every morning she handed me that cup of coffee. Every vacation I'd thought we both needed. Every quiet Tuesday night when she'd sat in the reading chair under the lamp and turned pages in that exact book. Completely unbothered. How long had Sandra Reese been inside that back cover? How long had Diane been building this? Here's something no one tells you about. The moment you realize your life has been a controlled environment. The hardest part isn't the evidence. It's the specific, disorienting vertigo of understanding that the person across the breakfast table was never confused or struggling or going through anything. She was always working. I had a friend named Philip Graves. We'd been close since we were in the same MBA cohort 22 years ago, which means he was old enough to tell me the truth without softening it. Philip spent 15 years investigating financial fraud for a regional insurance consortium, which means he had an almost medical interest in the architecture of long-term deception. I called him the following morning and laid out everything. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Marcus, how many shared accounts do you and Diane have?" "4. Joint checking. Joint savings. A household card. and a home equity line we'd opened in 2019. Who manages them? I opened my mouth. Then I closed it. Diane managed them. Had since year 3 of our marriage. When I'd mentioned in passing that I found financial administration genuinely tedious and she'd offered to take it over, I hadn't thought about it since. Why would I? The mortgage was always paid. The savings had grown consistently. Everything looked fine. Pull every statement. Philip said, 7 years minimum. I pulled 9. What I found didn't announce itself. That was the craft of it. No single withdrawal large enough to raise an alarm. No wire transfers to anything, obviously offshore. Instead, small. Passion. Deliberate movements. An $80 monthly transfer to an account number I didn't recognize. Labeled under a business name I'd never heard of. A recurring annual charge to what appeared to be a professional services subscription. A cash withdrawal every other month. Always just under the threshold that would require any kind of reporting flag. Over 9 years. Those movements totaled just under $74. Ling ling ling, $74,000. Moved so quietly, I had never once heard a sound. I sat at my desk at Uxia. Staring at those numbers and felt something I can only describe as a very specific kind of cold. Not fear. Scale. Because the first irregular transaction was dated 11 months after our wedding. She had begun before we'd finished unpacking. Philip came over the following day. We spread everything across the dining room table. Bank statements. Storage facility, paperwork. The police report. A timeline I'd constructed on a yellow legal pad at 2 a.m. Philip studied it in silence for a long time. The boiler. He said finally, "Walk me through where your phone was the week before Barry came." "What do you mean? Where was your phone?" "The night before Barry came, the night the boiler noise started." I thought about it. On the nightstand. I always charged it on the nightstand overnight. And where was Diane? Beside me. In the same bed. In the same room. For 17 years. She had taken my phone while I slept. She had called Holt Comfort Solutions from my number on a morning I was already at the office. I had a parking garage entry stamp to prove it. She had scheduled a technician she knew would go to the basement. Find the shelving. Find the door. Hear the recording. And send me exactly the text she needed me to receive. She had engineered the opening scene. The boiler noise was almost certainly a small mechanical device attached to the blower. Simple. Removable. The hidden room had been prepared over time, built out. Soundproofed at the seams. Staged. The recording. The burner phone. The timing of the remote trigger. She had been standing in Nashville at dinner with Paulette. And with a single tap on a remote app, she had set the whole production into motion while I ate a grilled cheese and watched basketball upstairs. "Marcus," Philip said, and his voice dropped to the register men use when they're about to say something they'd rather not. The financial pattern alone goes back 9 years. The identity construction, your name on those accounts, your signature on that rental agreement, that doesn't happen in a few months. That requires practice. Repetition. Long observation. He paused. She didn't just study you. She became fluent in you. I stood up and went to the kitchen window. I looked out at the backyard. The yard I'd mowed 400 times. The garden Diane had put in 3 summers ago, which I'd helped water every evening through August because she said the new plantings needed consistent moisture. I had watered her garden while she was building my ruin. There is a particular kind of stillness that settles over a man when he stops being frightened and starts being precise. I found that stillness on a Thursday morning sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and 9 years of bank records. And I made a decision I have not regretted for a single moment since. I did not call a lawyer. I did not confront Diane. I did not go to Detective Okafor with what Philip and I had assembled. Because I understood something, clearly evidence only carries weight when the person presenting it has credibility. And at that moment, I was a 53-year-old man whose name was on a storage unit connected to a missing woman's case. My credibility was not the asset it needed to be. Diane had thought of that. Of course she had. So I did the one thing she hadn't built a counter-strategy for. I became someone she couldn't locate. Not physically. Psychologically. I called my older sister. Vera Ellison Park. Former Army logistics officer. Current project manager. Resident of Charlotte. The kind of woman who keeps a laminated emergency contact list in her car and has never in her adult life panicked about anything. I drove to Charlotte on a Friday morning. Told Diane I needed space to clear my head after everything that had happened. Watched her face compose itself into exactly the right expression of tender concern. Take all the time you need. Marcus, I'll be right here. I almost smiled. At Vera's kitchen table over black coffee and the leftover rice she'd made the night before, I laid out everything. The basement. The storage unit. The bank records. The call logs. The photograph inside the back cover of the secret history. Vera listened without interrupting, which for her is the emotional equivalent of anyone else weeping. When I finished, she was quiet. Then, does she have someone she talks to? Someone she trusts completely? Her college friend, Miriam. I said. Miriam Shu. They've been close for 25 years. Talk twice a week. Sometimes more. Miriam lives in Charleston. She visits 3 or 4 times a year. When she visits, Diane takes her calls in the sunroom with the door closed. Vera nodded slowly. How many days ago did you put a listening device in the sunroom? I looked at her. She looked back. Completely straight-faced. Vera. I haven't. I know. She said. But you're about to. I am not. By nature. A man who moves toward conflict. I've coached youth lacrosse for 12 years. I am the one at gatherings who makes sure guests have what they need and remembers who's vegetarian. But I am a patient man. And patience, it turns out, is the only currency that matters in a game being played across a decade. Vera sourced a small wireless audio monitor ordered under her name. Shipped to a pickup locker. Paid for, with a gift card purchased in cash. Operational precision, she said, is just logistics with better stakes. I returned to Raleigh on Saturday afternoon. Told Diane I was feeling more settled. Let her hug me in the doorway. Felt her arms around my back. And felt absolutely nothing. Not rage. Not grief. Just a kind of cold. Luminous clarity. I installed the device on a Sunday morning while Diane was at the farmer's market. Small. Wireless. Tucked behind a ceramic planter on the sunroom windowsill that neither of us had moved in 3 years. It took me 6 minutes. I confirmed the audio feed was clear. Drove away. And came home for lunch. Diane made soup. Asked if things were starting to feel more normal. Getting there, I said. She smiled and passed me the bread. I waited 22 days. 22 days of being Marcus Ellison cooperative. Composed. Attentive husband. Patient subject of a missing persons investigation. 22 days of answering Detective Okafor's questions thoughtfully. Of letting Diane hold my hand in the hallway when Okafor left. Of watching her perform devoted concern, so precisely that even I had disorienting moments of wondering whether I had constructed the entire theory out of grief and paranoia. Then Miriam Chu came to visit on a Saturday in April. I excused myself. Told Diane I was heading to Phillips for the afternoon. Kissed her cheek. And drove 3 blocks before pulling over and opening my phone. The audio was immediate and clean. For the first 20 minutes they talked about ordinary things. Miriam's garden. A mutual friend's new baby. A weekend trip someone was planning. I almost convinced myself I had dismantled my marriage based on fear and a 7-year financial pattern that might have an innocent explanation. I'd simply failed to locate. Then Diane's voice changed. It was subtle. The way a river changes tone when it narrows. Same voice. Same cadence. But all the warmth withdrawn. The way afternoon light goes out of a room without you noticing the exact moment it leaves. She got quieter. He has no idea. Diane said. Miriam was quiet for a moment. You're completely certain. He's going to his friend's house for the afternoon. He's answering the detective's questions like a man who's never had anything to hide and doesn't understand what that looks like from the outside. Marcus is exactly who he's always been. He can't see past what's in front of him. That's always been true. A pause. It's honestly the thing I respected most about him for a long time. And the woman, Miriam asked carefully. Sandra. She's fine. Diane said. She's in Tucson. She agreed to stay out of circulation for 70 days. I compensated her more than adequately. By the time she surfaces, Marcus will already be past the point where any statement she makes changes anything. The narrative will have set. A pause. Diane. Miriam's voice shifted. What happens to him when it finishes building? He becomes the answer to a question the investigation is already asking. Diane said. Simply, evenly. They have his name on the accounts. His prints on surfaces in that unit. His financial movement over 9 years. I just need to let the structure hold for another few weeks. After that, it sustains itself. And you, somewhere with better weather than Raleigh. Diane said. And then she laughed. Ease. Unhurried. The laugh of a woman watching something she built perform exactly as designed. I sat in my parked car 3 blocks from my house listening to my wife describe the architecture of my destruction with the calm of someone reviewing a project that was ahead of schedule. And I felt that stillness again. Cold. Complete. Total. I did not call Vera. I did not call Philip. I did not call Detective Okafor. Not yet. Not that night. 2 days later, I hired a private investigator named Harold Pace. Retired Charlotte PD. Former fraud unit. Recommended by Philip. The kind of man who communicates in bullet points and considers emotion and inefficiency. I gave Harold one assignment, find Sandra Reese. It took him 8 days. She was in Tucson. Exactly where Diane said. A mid-tier hotel near a commercial strip. Cash payments. Registered under a name slightly different from her own. Harold had photographs. A recorded statement. And a notarized affidavit from a woman who, it turned out, had not fully grasped the scope of what she'd agreed to, and was substantially less comfortable with her situation now that a private investigator was sitting across from her in a hotel lobby explaining what the phrase material witness meant in practical terms. Sandra Reese was not a bad person. She was a person who had been offered an amount of money that felt like a solution and had not thought carefully enough about what the problem was. She gave Harold everything. How Diane had found her. What she'd been paid. How she'd been coached to remain unreachable for 70 days. She signed the affidavit with shaking hands. I now had 2 things. Diane did not know existed, a recorded conversation from the sunroom, and a signed sworn statement from a woman who was supposed to be missing. Here is what I did not do with them. I did not walk into the Raleigh Police Department and hand them to Detective Okafor. Because evidence delivered by a person of interest, however, exonerating enters a legal process. A slow, grinding, public process during which Diane would retain counsel, go silent, and spend the next 2 years systematically contesting everything from the other side. She was exceptionally good at building. I understood now that she was equally good at dismantling. I had seen the quality of her work, so I did something considerably simpler. On a Wednesday evening while Diane was in the sunroom reading, and I will tell you that the book in her lap was The Secret History, which I found to be a level of audacity I could only admire from a distance. I sat at the kitchen table and sent 2 files from an email address she had never encountered to a number she did not recognize. An audio file from a Saturday in April. A photograph of Sandra Reese, alive and well in Tucson, holding that morning's newspaper. No message. No name. No context. Just those two things. I closed the laptop, washed my mug, went to bed. 45 minutes later, Diane came upstairs. I watched through barely open eyes as she stood in the doorway of the bedroom, phone in hair hand, absolutely still. In 17 years, I had never seen Diane stand completely still. She was always in motion, adjusting, managing, arranging, optimizing. She stood in the doorway of that bedroom like a woman who had just noticed that the ground she was standing on was not the ground she'd mapped. Good. The next morning, I drove to Detective Okafor's office and placed Harold Pace's complete report on her desk. The affidavit, the photographs, the financial records, the call log analysis, the audio recording. All of it organized in a gray folder with a metal binder clip because I am a methodical person. Okafor read for 14 minutes without looking up. Then Mr. Ellison, I think we may need to revisit some assumptions. Linda, I said, I think we both know I didn't rent that unit. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. Diane was arrested on a Thursday. 16 charges. Conspiracy. Fraud, obstruction, identity theft, and several others that I'll leave to the legal record. She was walked out of the house at 10-15 inches the morning in handcuffs. In cold, flat, early spring light that made everything look overexposed. I watched from the front step. She looked back at me once, just once, as they guided her toward the patrol vehicle. And for the first time in 21 years, I could not read her face, could not locate the calculation behind her eyes, could not find the woman who had spent a decade and a half studying me, the way a counterfeiter studies the real thing. She just looked at me, and I nodded, because here is what Diane never understood about me, the single, fundamental miscalculation at the center of an otherwise nearly perfect plan. She had spent years watching what I did, where I walked, how I signed my name, how I slept. She had charted my patterns, predicted my reactions, mapped every habit and tendency I had. She had become fluent in me. She had never once paid attention to what I was thinking. At 53 years old, I am not a man who makes speeches. I do not slam doors. I do not require the final word in any room. I need only the final move. She spent 17 years building a structure designed to bury me. I dismantled it in 22 days. Somewhere, Diane is sitting with her attorney, reviewing a case file she thought she had written in her favor. She knows my signature. She knows my schedule. She knows how I take my coffee and which route I drive to work. She never knew my spine. And that was always going to be her only mistake.